Next, we're going to talk about moral development. So, several theorists had several ideas about how morality develops. Piaget, who we talked about last week, is one of those theorists. So, Piaget's theory of cognitive development, which was covered last class, also includes a theory about the development of moral reasoning. He says that moral reasoning also occurs in distinct, predictable phases. So first, the heteronomous morality stage, and then the autonomous morality stage. So heteronomous morality develops first. This stage is also called moral realism or morality of constraint. And according to Piaget, young children between the ages of 5 to 10 years of age are in this stage of moral reasoning. In this stage, children focus on the results of an action to make judgment rather than intention. So regardless of intention, just the results of the action are what children in this stage base their judgment on. So they think that rules are rules and they have to be followed no matter what. And because kids at this stage are egocentric, they think that everyone else feels the same way about following rules as they do. So when rules are broken for any reason, misbehavior will need to be punished. Kids in this stage believe in what's called imminent justice, where bad things always happen because you did something bad. So for example, kids in this stage think that falling and skinning your knee happens because you misbehaved at some point. And then around 12 years of age, children become capable of formal operations and more abstract thinking. So they tend to shift how they base moral judgments around this age and enter the second stage of moral reasoning called autonomous morality or morality of cooperation. So at this point, children now base their judgments off of the intentions of the action rather than the consequences of the action. Now it's okay to break rules occasionally when the intentions are good. So children at this stage understand that falling and skinning your knee doesn't happen because you did something bad, but because coincidental bad outcomes sometimes occur. Kohlberg also has a theory on moral reasoning. So Kohlberg elaborated on Piaget's theory of moral reasoning and refined it. So what he did was studied children's reactions to moral dilemmas that he presented when coming up with his theory. So here on your screen is a sample moral dilemma that Kohlberg would pose to these young children. So I'll let you guys read this over, and based on how people reacted to this moral dilemma, he created several different phases of moral reasoning. And a fun exercise to do with this is to take a minute to read the moral dilemma, then write down your reaction to the moral dilemma on a slip of paper, and then when we go over Kohlberg's stages of moral reasoning, you can see which stage Kohlberg would classify you in. So if you'd want to do that, pause the video here, take a minute to read, write down your reaction, and then unpause when you're ready to move on. All right, so Kohlberg proposed that people pass through a series of 6 stages of moral reasoning. And those 6 stages are grouped into 3 levels: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. The levels are separated by how a person defines what she or he perceives to be correct moral behavior and the reasoning behind it. So, according to Kohlberg, each stage is more sophisticated and complex than the preceding one. So at the pre-conventional level, rules are set down by others. So this is very similar to the heteronomous morality that Piaget talked about. So the first stage is the punishment and obedience orientation. So physical consequences of the action determine its goodness or badness. So if a good thing happens as a result of an action, then it was a good thing. But if a bad thing happens after an action, then it's a bad thing. There's no gray area, very black or white. Stage 2, instrumental relativist orientation. So again, they become more and more sophisticated as they move on. Conventional level, this is where some gray area is introduced. So there's expectations of the family group or nation as a whole that is seen as valuable, regardless of those immediate consequences. So the individual still adopts rules, but will sometimes defer their own needs to the needs of the group. Post-conventional, this is where ethical principles come into play, so much more gray than the previous two levels. And I won't spend time reading over this, but definitely read over each of the 6 stages and become more familiar with them to learn what Kohlberg said we go through when we develop our moral reasoning. The last little bit of the lecture is centered on emotional development. So, basic emotions are universal across all human beings and have a long history evolutionarily of promoting survival. And some emotions that are universal across all human beings are happiness, interest, surprise, fear, anger, sadness, and disgust. And we have had lots of research on emotions across different cultures that verify that these emotions exist globally. When a baby is first born, some signs of emotions are present. However, newborns' earliest emotions are truly comprised of 2 things, the first being attraction to pleasant stimulation, and the second, withdrawal from unpleasant stimulation. Then gradually, as the newborn grows, emotions become more clear and well-organized signals from the newborn to the world. So when we look at happiness, around 6 to 10 weeks of age, children first engage in social smiling. So they'll see someone and that's when they'll smile. And that is when it truly is meant to convey that they are pleased to see the person or are happy with the person. Whereas before, a smile would represent a child's reaction to pleasant stimulation. We see laughter begin to emerge around 3 to 4 months. And then sadness truly starts to show at 4 to 6 months. It is true that children cry before the age of 4 to 6 months, but again, that's a response to unpleasant stimulation rather than true sadness as an emotion. Anger also begins to emerge around 4 to 6 months, and then fear begins to emerge around 6 months. And we typically think of fear with this negative connotation. However, fear is necessary for children to survive. So that little bit of anxiety or uncertainty will keep kids from, say, putting themselves in a dangerous situation or from straying too far away from mom or dad. It's within early childhood, so between the ages of 2 and 6, that we see gains in emotional competence. So during this age range, children become better understanding their own emotions, better at self-regulating their own emotions, and then better at understanding other people's emotions. So now they're capable of experiencing more self-conscious emotions. At this age, they are now moving away from solely interacting with their family members, and now they're interacting with a more diverse group of people, including new adults and a greater amount of peers as the child goes to preschool and then later elementary school. So those more self-conscious emotions, shame, guilt, pride, they begin to emerge within early childhood. And during early childhood, children begin to develop a self-concept of who they are. So, what set of attributes, abilities, attitudes, and values define me? Those are the questions that a child internally asks while they're developing a self-concept. And then from self-concept, self-esteem begins to emerge. Am I good? Do I have worth? Do I not have worth? And so on. So, children experience social emotional gains as their pro-social capabilities increase. What is pro-social behavior? Pro-social behavior are a set of actions that benefit someone else without any expected reward for the self. And additionally, empathy and sympathy begin to emerge. Empathy being feeling with another person and responding emotionally in a similar way. And sympathy being feelings of concern or sorrow for someone else. So again, at this age, children achieve a better understanding of their own and others' feelings. So at age 4, a child is usually able to interpret external reasons behind emotions and can read emotions to predict future behaviors. So for example, a child may see a peer crying and understand, oh, Tommy is sad because he misses his mom. Or Jill is angry, so she might hit someone. So I am going to stay away from Jill right now and then come back and play with her when she is feeling less angry. Or Brandy is happy, so she'll probably share her car with me if I ask. Those are all examples of how children are able to interpret external reasons behind emotions at this age. So as children become more self-aware and better at communicating and understanding the thoughts and feelings of others, their skills at interacting with their peers improves rapidly. In 1932, a woman named Mildred Parton studied peer sociability among 2 to 5-year-olds, and she noticed that social development often occurs in a 3-step sequence. So first, children engage in non-social activity that generally consists of watching another person play, so onlooker behavior is watching another person play, or just playing alone, solitary play. So first, children non-socially play, and then play shifts to being parallel, where a child will play near other children with similar materials, but will not try to influence the other child's behavior or play with them necessarily, so playing beside them. At the last step in the sequence, and the highest level, there are 2 forms of true social interaction or social play: associative play and cooperative play. In associative play, children will engage in separate activities, but will exchange toys and comment on each other's behavior. So some interaction is taking place, even though they're engaging in separate activities and trying to achieve separate goals. And then in cooperative play, this is where children will orient together towards a common goal, like playing make-believe. So as we move out of the early childhood into middle childhood years, self-conscious emotions become very influential. So again, pride, guilt, shame. Think back to your own experience of middle school. At this age range, children are able to describe their internal states of feeling and understand more complex mixed emotions. And they're also able to compare their own characteristics to the characteristics of their peers. They're also able to speculate about the causes of their strengths and weaknesses. And all of this has an effect on the child's self-concept and self-esteem. Then moving into adolescence, kids are capable of all of the previously listed emotions, and they experience increased emotional regulation, but also this is where puberty hits. So there are several influences on adolescent emotional well-being, including peer relationships, how they feel about themselves, who they think they are, so self-concept and self-esteem, bullying, and also mental illness. So all of this contributes to the crazy time of being an adolescent. And thinking about this emotional development in addition to Erikson's psychosocial stage that is happening right now, all of these influences mixed with just the sheer enormous task of figuring out who you are as a person, that can be a lot for adolescents. So as adults in their lives, we want to best support them through this confusing, messy time as best possible. Oops, I said we were ending with emotional development, but let's talk about Marcia's identity statuses briefly before we close out this week's lecture. So this ties along nicely with talking about adolescence, because as Erikson said with his stage about identity versus role confusion, and as we talked about in the last slide regarding adolescent emotion, this is a very confusing time for kids as they're trying to figure out what their identity is. So James Marcia looked at Erikson's work, and he identified 4 identity statuses that adolescents may go through that reflect the degree to which they've made firm commitments to religious and political values, as well as their potential future occupation. So he said that an adolescent may be in foreclosure, identity diffusion, moratorium, or in identity achievement. So within foreclosure, this is where the parent's choice for who the child is accepted rather than the child's choice of who they are. So this generally generates this pseudo-identity, Marcia said, that could be too fixed or too rigid to serve as a foundation for meeting life's future crises, thinking back to Erikson and resolving them. So adolescents who just accept who they are based on what someone else tells them they have to be generally don't have the best results later on in life. In identity diffusion, this is where adolescents haven't really found or have made little progress towards who they think they are, including an occupational direction or some ideological commitment. And this may be where they've experienced an identity crisis, but they're unable to resolve it. So they're kind of just in this state of limbo, just stuck, not knowing who they are. And again, this state of identity status does not result in the best outcomes. So identity moratorium, according to Marcia, is when adolescents have begun to experiment with what they want to do and what they believe, but haven't yet made a definitive commitment. So this will happen with many adolescents as they grapple with who they are and who they want to be. And generally, kids will move out of this to identity achievement. And Marcia says that by late adolescence, between age 22, most individuals do develop a status of identity achievement, where they've made this conscious, very clear decision regarding what they believe and what they want to do. So, research has found that identity status is linked with adolescents' emotional development and self-esteem. So it's been found that levels of anxiety are highest for adolescents in moratorium and lowest for adolescents in foreclosure. However, levels of self-esteem are highest for adolescents in identity achievement in moratorium, so still figuring it out, and lowest for those in foreclosure and identity diffusion. So generally, adolescents have to be able to experiment and be flexible to successfully find out who they are and choose their own identity. But in order to do this, they have to have the self-confidence to experiment. So thinking back to Erikson's stages, meeting all of those stages' goals and resolving those crises will really set kids on the path to being able to figure out who they are and what they want to do, so that as an adult they can be a productive member of society and feel like they're contributing. All right, and that is it for this week's lecture. Remember to complete the Check for Understanding activity and turn it in by Saturday at 11:59 p.m. If you missed hearing what the Check for Understanding activity is this week, go ahead and watch back through the lecture. I laid it out pretty explicitly for you guys. And then in addition, you have a discussion board that is due this week called Theories of Development. So look through that discussion board for more specific instructions on how to complete it. Remember to create one original post and respond to 2 peers' posts by Saturday at 11:59 for full credit on that assignment. So again, what's due on Saturday? First, the Check for Understanding activity. Second, your Theories of Development discussion board post. All right, guys, thanks for listening in. Have a great week, and if you have any questions, be sure to let me know.